Hello, welcome to the MKM Healthcare Fraud in the NHS e-learning module. This module is designed to provide you with the information and resources that you need in order to think about how fraud can occur within the NHS. And by the end of the session, you will be able to state the 7 principles of fraud. You may wish to have a pen and paper handy so that you can make notes or to answer any questions that you may be asked within this module. At the end of the module, you will be given a multiple choice question paper, which when you complete successfully, you will be issued with a certificate, which you can either save or print as part of your continuing professional development records. It's estimated approximately £3 billion is lost each year as a result of fraud within the NHS. The majority of people who work within the NHS and people who provide services for the NHS or service users are honest, but there are a small number who will defraud the resources within it. Therefore, it is important that we are all aware of the types of fraud that are committed, and we must be all aware of our responsibilities and how to report this fraud. Defrauding money from the NHS deprives hospitals and service users of valuable equipment, staff and resources, and it can end up with the taxpayer paying more to fund the NHS. Fraud is simply stealing or dishonest behaviour, and it can be carried out by service users or people working within the NHS or people working on behalf of the NHS. It includes activities such as falsifying invoices, claiming for parking charges, or claiming for hours worked dishonestly. Also, if you know of fraud that has taken place and you do not report it, then you are also accountable. Just spend a couple of minutes thinking about fraudulent activities that could potentially happen within your work area. So what's the difference between fraud and corruption? The definition of this is clearly outlined within the NHS Counter-Fraud Charter, and it clearly defines fraud as a deliberate intent to deprive an employer of money or goods through the falsification of any records or documents. Corruption is whereby someone is influenced by bribery, payment or benefit in kind to unreasonably use his or her position to give some advantage to another. In 2006, the Fraud Act was introduced, and it covered the 7 principal areas of where a general offence of fraud would be covered, and that includes fraud by false representation, fraud by failing to disclose information, fraud by abuse of position, possession of articles for use in frauds, making or supplying articles for use in frauds, participating in fraudulent behaviour, and obtaining services fraudulently. If you suspect fraud in any of these areas, then you must immediately report it, and you can report it anonymously. You do not need to give your details. NHS Counter-Fraud aims to reduce fraud against the NHS to a minimum. This releases valuable resources for better patient care and services. The NHS Counter-Fraud Service is responsible for revising policy and processes in order to prevent fraud occurring in the first place, providing information to target action exactly where it is needed, identifying the nature and the scale of the problem of the NHS fraud and corruption, setting and monitoring the standards of counter-fraud work. Each NHS trust in England and local health boards in Wales has a local counter-fraud specialist assigned to it. The NHS Counter-Fraud Service aims to create an anti-fraud culture by publicising the work that they do, raising awareness of the issues and deter potential fraudsters. By detecting and investigating the frauds that do occur, they can recover losses, returning money to the health service. They also use the information to gain information about the fraud that does take place within the NHS, and also this can contribute to recommendations that they may make to health bodies. They also look at weak processes that need to be strengthened in order to prevent fraud occurring in the first place. Anybody who uses the NHS services or works within the NHS potentially can commit fraud. It is therefore vital that if you suspect fraud, you follow your local policy and procedure to deal with this effectively. The patient obtained 3 prescriptions by giving false names and false addresses. She also stole a number of prescriptions from a GP surgery and used them to obtain drugs including dihydrocodeine and temazepam, which are commonly misused. She was successfully prosecuted and imprisoned for 8 months. Another example of fraud is whereby a nurse applied for a position as an emergency care practitioner. He used false documents in order to get this position. He produced a false diploma in critical care and he provided false information on his CV. He declared that he had a wealth of experience working within this field, whereby he actually had no experience whatsoever in this area. In this emergency situations, he was to be the first person to arrive at the scene before the doctor arrived. He continued to do this and successfully gained posts in 2 more NHS trusts before he was found out. It cost the NHS almost £47,000 in fraudulent earnings, national insurance contributions and pension contributions. He also accessed some training and this was also claimed for. He was fined £2,000 and he was ordered to pay £800 towards his costs. Practice manager issued inappropriate overtime payments to herself, duplicated invoices and personally cashed business cheques. She defrauded the NHS of up to £70,000 and she was successfully prosecuted and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. The NHS was conned out of more than £72,000 when a mental health nurse used false documents to gain an NHS bursary, training and work. She began a mental health nursing diploma course and earned £51,875, even though she had been refused leave to remain in the UK. She provided counterfeit documents for student visas, enabling her to access a bursary for which she was paid £20,886. She was found guilty and she was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment for 6 fraud-related offences. If you suspect fraud or corruption, you must report it immediately. You can report it using the NHS fraud hotline on telephone number 0800 028 40 60. All information is confidential and if you wish, you can leave this information anonymously. Do not confront the individual that you suspect may be committing fraud or corruption. If you have any information that you think is useful as evidence, keep this safely. You do not need to contact the police, although in some circumstances you may need to contact your Director of Finance. If you just need further advice or guidance, you can contact your local counter-fraud specialist. We all need to be vigilant about fraud and corruption, and if you suspect anything, we must report it immediately. Follow the do's and don'ts in reporting your suspicions.